and deployment of all of these technologies. Prior to this position, Jay was MnDOT's state traffic engineer, and he has over 22 years of experience, has a bachelor and master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Minnesota. So with that, I'd like to welcome Jay.
All right, thanks, Joe, for the great introduction. Anybody know what, so our office is CAVX. Anybody know what the X means? Some of you probably do. He always says, what's the X for? Even our commissioner was like, CAVX, what is X? So X is kind of all the unknowns that go along with this. So there's just way too many things that we don't know about for the future. And X is all the other things that we do in our office too. So we're not just about connected automated vehicles, we actually do just traditional ITS pieces too. So I would say I have one of the best jobs in the DOT because there's so many unknowns with this that if I screw something up, no one really knows if I screwed up or not because no one really knows what the right answer is. So I have a great job for the DOT.
Should be going here.
Use the arrow button.
Not going yet? Try now.
Just one slide. Oh, there we go. Maybe it's on. All right, here we go. So I'm just going to give a quick little CAV background. I know a lot of you are already familiar with this materials. Talk about some things that happen on the federal level, the state level, and then some of the big questions you may have is, as a traffic engineer, how do I start preparing for these pieces? All right, so big question is why? Why do we want to do this is always the number one thing. So safety for us is a very important piece. Right? We know that a lot of crashes are occurring. Over 90% of them have some kind of human element. If we can take that human element out of those crashes, it's really going to make our roadways safer in the future. Mobility and equity is a big piece, especially for our governor. I learned a lot from two people, from Mira Pearson and Joe and Wilshire. So both of them are disabled. They are unable to drive. Mira is unable to drive. She's in a car crash about 14 years ago. She says, you really don't understand connected automated vehicles until it hits you personally. So I started looking at my life. Everything. So my mother is 82 years old, and she just said, I can't drive anymore. I just can't do it. So a lot of her personal freedom has now gone away. She used to love to go to church and go to the grocery store and run over and see her grandkids. She can't do those things. So these are one of the things that we're trying to do is give a better quality of life for people, give better access to health care, better access to jobs. So mobility and equity is a big piece for us too. Preparing for economic and workforce development. This is a global economy, and others are out there trying to use this technology to get ahead somehow. So Minnesota needs to keep up, make sure we're staying competitive, and getting our workforce prepared for this technology at the same time. We hope there's going to be some efficiencies with this. You know, we think traffic congestion could possibly go up. There might be more VMT, but hopefully there'll be some more efficiencies with our signal systems and throughput of vehicles. And then the last one I touched on briefly is kind of that maximize that health in the environment. How can we use the vehicles to better the quality of life for all? Right, we talk about connected automated vehicles. We also talk about electrification. You may say, well, how does electrification kind of tie into this? So we talked to the car manufacturers. Most of them are saying, you know, we're looking at an all-electric fleet for our automated vehicles in the future. So we started to be cognizant of what's the effect of electrification and also the effect of shared mobility. You start looking at some of the manufacturers, GM and Ford, why are they going down this route? Right, it might be more than just selling cars. It might be selling a service instead. They still may retain ownership of those vehicles and operate more like an Uber or Lyft. So how does that impact how we operate and maintain our system? So these are things that we're just kind of cognizant of as we move forward. Truck platooning is one of those connected vehicle pieces that you actually may see on the roadways fairly soon. So this technology is really being developed by the freight industry. It's all about economics for them. So they have truck platooning. Right now, our laws say the trucks have to be 500 feet apart on the freeway. What they want to do is get down to about 40, 50, 60 feet apart and start getting those aerodynamic drafts. And they can get some pretty substantial fuel savings, sometimes up to 10% on that on the back truck and about 3 to 4% on that front truck. So economics is driving truck platooning. We start looking at what's happening across the country. All the states in blue have enacted some sort of AV legislation already. Some of them are testing, some of them are just kind of forming a few committees, but those blue states have already made steps forward. The green states, which we are, is an executive order. So the governor has made some kind of decree or a direction to state government to start working on some things. And the states in yellow have both laws and executive orders. So I'll go to some detail later on about our executive order. And this is truck platooning. So all the states in blue have actually authorized truck platooning. 23 states already have already authorized truck platooning. You can see there's a big gap. Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. Those are probably some of the best areas to do truck platooning. Wide open freeways, not a lot of traffic. Those are probably the best spots. We start talking with our truck platooning vendors. Well, truck platooning through downtown Minneapolis at rush hour is not going to give them any benefit at all. They want more of the I-90s, the I-35s, where you're outside of those dense urban areas, and you get your speeds up around at least 65 miles an hour. All right, so what is the federal government saying? So NHTSA has been looking at, they've had several pieces of guidance that have come out over the past couple of years. The federal government's kind of taking a little bit of a hands-off approach, saying we're going to let the technology kind of develop before we start highly regulating some of these pieces. One thing they're really tight on, though, is they do not want states and local governments to start regulating vehicles themselves. They say that's way too hard for the manufacturers to develop a car that's specific to a MnDOT or a Minnesota regulation. So let us maintain the vehicles, the safety regulations of the vehicles. You still maintain your traffic laws and your licensing pieces. So they are looking at a self-certification approach. They don't actually do third-party validation of the technology. Europe is doing a lot of that. We're not doing that here in the United States. They're trying to finally align. Each group was kind of working separately in the DOT. So FHWA was working on some stuff, and NHTSA was working on some pieces, and Freight Motor Vehicles was working on some pieces. They're all starting to come together now a little bit. They say that the METC will be updated soon to account for CAP. Thought there'd be big laughter across the room if we talk about how fast the feds will update the METC. So don't count on anything too soon. They are starting to finally look at freight. And the big thing for us was about 2 years ago, they had designated 10 pilot proving grounds, the federal government did. So we applied for our Minroad site. We were not selected. So in this last round of guidance, they said, don't worry about those 10 sites that we have. You can go anywhere that you want to do your testing. So that kind of opens up some doors for us here in Minnesota. All right. So I know a lot of you deal with local units of government, some of your jobs as consultants. So there's some guidance there back on what we can do for local units of government. So the big thing is to make sure that they're actually encouraging the safe testing of these vehicles on the local streets. For us at MnDOT, it's great to do some of the testing, but the testers really want to be in those urban environments to learn how to deal with pedestrians and signal systems and some of those other challenging pieces. So those labs in the cities and towns are probably a better fit compared to a MnDOT roadway. Don't just think about level 4 and level 5 vehicles. Start thinking about the 2s and the 3s that are actually on the roadways today, because I think there's some great benefits we can get out of those vehicles. And those are coming online faster and faster and faster. I see it a lot. When I watch car commercials, you watch a Super Bowl or a football game, you see the car commercials, and you see little bits and pieces how they're talking about automated vehicle technology. Ford will talk, you'll see a Ford commercial, and the person has their hands off the steering wheel, right? They can buy that Ford driving system today. Tesla's doing a lot of great things out there. GM with their Super Cruise. So all these pieces of the puzzle are building. They're building at a very rapid rate. We were talking with GM, their Super Cruise, and right now it's only in their Cadillacs. And they want to expand that to a lot more of their fleets. They've said this has been such a hot want or need from our customers that they're trying to expand it as fast as they can across the rest of their fleets. So a great sign moving forward. Just from those locals to start looking at thinking about land use and curb space, how you can utilize some of those things, thinking about the potential for increased VMT and how you can manage some of those pieces. And then a big piece is engage with your citizens. The public's going to start asking more and more and more questions about this. So just getting educated about what it is, when it's going to come, what we can actually do today versus what we can't do today. So just having those conversations with the citizens. All right, at the federal level, I won't go into a lot of the federal pieces, but the House has already kind of passed their Self-Drive Act. The Senate's been sitting on their bill for well over a year moving forward. There's some preemption pieces that the locals might be concerned with in both bills. If you want a description of side-by-side of the two bills, there's a thing called ENO Center for Transportation. You can go on there, and they have a great side-by-side comparison of the bills. So they keep saying the Senate is going to pick up their bill any day, but we just don't see any movement on our end right now. Then there's the big technology debate, right? 5G versus DRC, and what is it, who's going to do what. So the industry right now is really split on these different technologies. GM and Toyota are saying, we're in on DSRC. We think that's the future. Ford's the opposite. Ford says, nope, we're going to go cellular technology. So some states are starting to take a position on this. We're trying to maintain more technology neutral, and so is the federal government on some of these pieces. We don't want to hinder the private industry. So if the states all came and said, no, it must be DSRC, the automobile manufacturers say, well, then we're just not going to do it at all. We've lost a great opportunity. So we are trying to develop things that are both kind of 5G or DSRC capable, ready to go. So that's kind of our position at NCITE. All right, so a big question is, when will it come? I tend to listen to what the automobile manufacturers are saying. There's a lot of people out there talking about this. Some talk very matter-of-factly about stop building roadways today. We're not ready to make those bold statements yet at NDOT, like some people are, but I tend to listen to what the automobile manufacturers say. So these are just a couple of news clipping headlines that we've kind of picked out over the past couple months or so. So how many heard about GM a couple months ago said 14,000 people are going to get laid off, right? Big news. You read deeper in that article, what did they say they're going to focus on? Two things: AVs and electrification. So when GM makes a bold statement like that, we know that they're probably spending some serious dollars in making this a priority for them. Truck platooning is already occurring with Freightliner across some of the northwest areas and the south. Waymo recently said they're going to establish an AV factory in Michigan. They have 14,000 cars that are operating in the Arizona area soon. Then Toyota and Lexus say they're going to put DSRC technology, dedicated short-range communication technology, in all their vehicles by 2021. So Toyota will have vehicle-to-vehicle technology in their cars, and they'll also be able to start communicating with signal systems around that time too. So that's a bold statement for them to move that forward. This is things that we talked about, whether they're already actually here in some circumstances. This one here is on 494. This occurred last summer. So how many have driven in a Tesla or seen the Tesla technology? Right? You take your hands off the steering wheel, it's looking at your pavement markings, and it can just stay right in its lane. So a young man in a Tesla was driving on 494 at night, and that vehicle was following the lane line. Here's the lane line right here. So we had a moving lane closure that was up. And so we have a moving lane closure. The first truck with the arrow board is on the shoulder. The next one is kind of partially out in the lane. And the third one is in the lane, kind of getting people to move out of that lane. So this young man actually sideswiped one of our TMAs. He admitted, I had my autopilot on, I was looking at my phone and not paying attention at all. So we started looking at the impacts of our workforce. This is something that we're really concerned about. I always put this one up here, the State Patrol, to remind me of a different story. So we just happened to be talking to Patrol one day, and they said, we had a unique incident on 35E I think it was last May. They said one of our patrol officers was out there, and he was just doing his normal patrol, and he saw somebody driving, and they were writing in a notebook as they were driving, not looking at the roadway at all. Of course, the lights go on, he pulls them over and says, hey, it seems like you were distracted, not paying attention. The person said, well, I'm actually testing out the automated vehicle technologies for this car. The car had dummy VIN numbers. It had a Michigan license plate, and the person said, I'm working for a car manufacturer. I really can't tell you what exactly I'm doing or I'm writing down. It's kind of top secret technology. So the officer's like, is this legal or not legal? I don't really know, right? So the officer gave him a warning for driving with undue care. So they're actually testing out on our roadways right now in Minnesota. We just don't even know about it. So interesting piece. All right. So we've had a great opportunity through the executive order to really have some great one-on-one conversations with the industry. We've kind of asked them, what do you need? The biggest thing they said is clear and uniform laws. We can't have every city, county, town, state developing their own laws on what the vehicles can and can't do. So that's the biggest piece. Audi actually says they have a level 3 vehicle ready to go, but they can't really sell it in the United States yet because the laws are so different among all the states. They're not sure if it's actually legal or not to own that vehicle. So the technology is kind of waiting for some of the policy and rules to come through. And we asked them about the infrastructure. So they weren't really, yes, you have to do this. A lot of them said, well, probably better pavement markings. That's going to help us out a little bit. Then the other piece was kind of real-time information. They said, work zones is a challenge for us. We really need to know what's happening with the work zones. We had a conversation with GM, their Super Cruise people, a couple weeks ago, and they have people that each day go on DOT websites and just search where all the work zones are so they can go in and disengage their technology. So Super Cruise works on basically all the freeway systems, and it's kind of like the Tesla technology. You can take your hands off the steering wheel and the vehicle will stay by itself. But they have all the freeways mapped and geo-fenced. But when there's a work zone, they want to be able to disengage that technology from a safety standpoint. So they just have people scouring websites trying to figure out where are the work zones occurring and turning these geofences on and off. So that's a big piece for them was work zones, signal system data, either getting the data directly out of a server, central server, or getting it through DSRC or 5G technology right at the signal system was a big piece too for connectivity. And then just that incident management, when are roads closed, when are there weather incidents, how can we get that data? So that's what the industry has been telling us. All right, so a little bit about our executive order. So we were starting to talk about, hey, Minnesota, we're a little bit behind on our legislation, right? Other states are already starting to pass this. We talked to the governor's office. The governor said, all right, I understand what you're trying to do, keeping us ready to go for automated connected vehicles, but I want to be more thoughtful before we start jumping into laws. So we're actually the first state that's actually done some broad stakeholder engagement before passing laws. So the governor said, I want to do 3 things. So he said, by December 1st, I want a report that gives me recommendations to policy, statutes, and rules in a bunch of different areas. And I'll kind of go through those in a little bit. So what he does, he formed an advisory council. So he goes, I don't want just this report to come from MnDOT. I want to make sure that we're getting the public and stakeholders input too. So the advisory council is actually hand-chosen by the governor. I learned a lot going through this process. So anybody could apply to the process and say, advisory council, you're going to be kind of guiding where MnDOT wants to go or where the state of Minnesota wants to go with this. So we actually had 85 or 86 people apply, which is a lot for one of these no-pay advisory council pieces. The advisory council was a broad cross-section, so it included Teamsters and union representatives, impacts on drivers. We had some Minnesota businesses in there. We had 3M and Polaris. We had transit users. We had transit providers. We had venture capitalists. We had persons with disabilities. So kind of a very broad cross-section of Minnesota. And so we kind of put together our list and said, Governor, here's who we recommend. And the governor personally would go in there and he would say, well, I want to have these other people on the advisory council instead. So he actually handpicks the advisory council. So that group met basically monthly between March and December to kind of formulate what those recommendations would be back to the governor. So also required MnDOT and DPS to establish some testing programs. So what can we actually do today with inside of our laws? And our laws today are very, very gray on this. So it requires that there needs to be a person or a driver in each one of the vehicles. We look at the definition of a person. And a person can be a human being. It can be a limited liability company. It could be a partnership. So really, can a car just legally drive itself today? Maybe. Some car manufacturers approached us and said, we can just come there and do stuff right now. Your laws are so great. Others said, well, we want a little more clarity in what we could actually do in Minnesota. And the last one was establishes we call it the ICAV team. So it's just our sister agency. So we get together at least once a month with our state patrol. Colonel Langer, who's the top of the state patrol, is very actively involved with this group. Driver services, so driver's licensing and registration, training are in there. Department of Commerce, when we start talking about insurance and liability, deed in terms of economic development. So it's all the state agencies getting together to make sure we're looking at this from a standard approach. All right, so these are all the areas the governor said. I want recommendations within 6 months on all these different pieces. So we set up actually subcommittees and working groups. I think some of you may have actually participated in some of the infrastructure or land use and planning. But we got together professionals and had workshops, at least 2 meetings on each one of these different topics to get what their input was. So you look at the report, there's recommendations on each one of these different areas. So for example, in insurance, that was not a MnDOT-led thing. That was Department of Commerce was working closely with the insurance agency. Land use and planning was very heavy on the city side. We got the University of Minnesota involved with some of those pieces. Traffic regulations involved a lot of law enforcement on their recommendations. So I'm going to go through some high-level recommendations today. So the report is out. It is online. And there are 6 major themes. So the first major theme is modernized policy. We need to be getting our laws and standards up to snuff compared to the other states we made so we are able to get ready for this technology if and when it comes. Equity is a big piece too. So it's not just for everybody who can afford a Tesla or a Cadillac with Super Cruise. How do we make sure we don't widen that gap in equity? So it's the technology is for all. Proactive leadership and engagement is a big piece too. The advisory council was really good about kind of keeping us grounded and focused, not looking at just the technology pieces. So keeping some sort of advisory council moving in the forward. And we had those working groups set up. don't just stop the conversations with the recommendations. Continue to keep those working groups going. So we have a legislative bill, we can bounce it off those groups at the same time. Education is a big piece of this. So AAA does a survey about every 6 months or so about automated vehicles, and 2/3 of Americans are actually afraid of the technology. They say, I just don't trust it, I don't believe it, right? We kind of found a little bit different piece to that. We've had a couple small little demonstrations. We had a shuttle downtown Minneapolis last year, a little easy mile unmanned shuttle bus. Then we had a Polaris had a vehicle in our booth at the state fair. And once the public was actually come to see the technology and touch it and experience it, our unscientific data shows that about 80% of them are really excited about the technology. So the more they have a chance to see and feel and touch, the more comfort they have with the technology. So the education piece is a big thing too. It's not just about the benefits, but it's also about the risks. You know, we saw the Tesla crash on 494. If somebody says, well, my vehicle can drive itself, they probably shouldn't put their autopilot on yesterday when it's snowing outside. So knowing what the limitations of the technology is also a big piece too. Funding and revenue, we know it's going to take money to upgrade our infrastructure, to train people, to do our driver's licensing a little bit different. So what are those funding and revenue streams? Then partnerships. So we can't do this alone. It requires working with academia and private industry. So really quickly on some of the top recommendations that might impact you is the policy piece. So one of them was, let's start passing some laws to start doing some A/B testing, make our laws really clear, and let's start passing some laws on vehicle platooning and start getting MnDOT on the map, or Minnesota on the map. I'll go through some more details of those later on. From a leadership side, keep that advisory council work going, keep that public engagement piece going, and then expand our Minnesota team to include local units of government and tribal agencies. All right, infrastructure is a big piece. So we had, this group was chaired by Mark Krebsbach from Dakota County and I. We probably had the biggest turnout out of any one of the groups. A lot of great input. So we came up with 10 key recommendations and things that we should start doing now. Start looking at modernizing our signal systems. I know at MnDOT we have a new controller that we have that kind of gets us ready for this technology in the future. Looking at how we can improve our pavement markings out there. We think the communication, the backbone is going to be key, so expanding that fiber optic network. And then data. How can we get better data, higher quality data, and how can we get that data out to third parties that can actually use it? We did not look at investing in new test facilities. Some states are building big test facilities. We said we're probably not going to be able to compete in that world and have a strategy there. Well, let's just fund testing on our existing publicly owned roadways instead. And then a big piece is before we start jumping into some of this, make sure we're doing the proper assessments. So we start talking about truck platooning. What's the impact of the bridges? What's the impact of the pavements? Can we handle those pieces? So making sure we're doing that assessment first. Other infrastructure pieces are, don't just start thinking about automated vehicles. It's about all roadway users. There's going to be bikes and peds and motorcycles out there for a long, 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 long time, right? They're not ever going to go away. So making sure that we're not just focused on automated vehicles. Flexible procurement process is really big too. This is happening so fast that if we use our traditional procurement methods, by the time we try to write an RFP and get it on the street and get it issued, the technology may have passed us by. So having really flexible procurement processes. And then the big thing too is the standards. So MnDOT should be taking the lead on doing that federal communication, to making sure we have some national standards developed, and at the state level, working with our local units of government to make sure we're developing those standards. How am I doing on time? Good? Okay. All right. Also is how do we get those data pieces back to a central server, developing those public-private partnerships, and then on the EV side, not really making huge investments, but just starting to support those EV investments. So there's a whole different group that's kind of charging the EV side. We want to support what they're doing, saying, hey, this is going to tie into automated vehicles in the future. All right, so what's next with the report? There's a lot of different recommendations in there. Two big things that are moving forward actually right now today are some legislative pieces. So just this morning, I think, those went to our commissioner's desk to go to the governor. So we actually have a draft bill ready to go that we work with the advisory council on to allow automated vehicle testing. So it would be through a permit process. There's actually some unique things in there about if the vehicle has no steering wheel and no pedals and it can't be operated by a human, that you don't actually even have a driver's license to test those vehicles in Minnesota. So a huge step for the disabled community, right? Why are you going to require me to have a driver's license if the vehicle I can't even physically grab the steering wheel and drive it? So we're on the spectrum of different pieces. California is highly regulatory, where to get a permit is really excruciating in California. Arizona is a little more wide open. They kind of say, well, just show up. We don't really even care where you are or what you're doing. Just have at it. We're kind of in the middle somewhere. That's where we are with the regulations. Then we actually have a truck platooning bill too to allow truck platooning on MnDOT freeways and expressways designated by the commission. You can go back up a slide. Yep. So just a little bit about our CAVX office. We're trying to pull all these pieces together. So we are a small little office. We are kind of a spin-off of the MnDOT traffic office. So it's myself, and then Kristen White is an attorney, so we bring in kind of a policy attorney piece to it. Corey Johnson and his team of Rashmi Brewer, Dan Rowe, and Mike Kronzer, they're kind of our ITS gurus, our technology engineers. We also have a planning vacancy we're posting right now to kind of bring in planning at the same time. So looking at engineering, policy, and planning all as one piece. So MnDOT is actually the lead state agency. So we deal a lot with State Patrol and Department of Public Safety, and they're actually looking for MnDOT to kind of be the driving force kind of moving this forward. So we look at what's happening across the country, trying to share lessons learned, bringing together all those state agencies, and developing those public-private partnerships. All right. Hold on. So as a traffic engineer, what do I plan for, right? This is the big million-dollar question. So I get a lot of pressure in my job on, you need to start doing this or you need to start doing that, right? So looking at some of the things that we do as traffic engineers, right? So signing, I always get the question, you need to have better signing out there. You need to start having dedicated lanes for automated vehicles or connected vehicles. You need to start upgrading your signal systems. You need to get your data put together. You need to have better pavement markings. You need to develop some apps that people can actually use to use the technology. You need to do more stuff with work zones, right? So many different things to work on, not knowing what the future is going to be. So before we start diving into these things, this is kind of MnDOT's approach to this right now. Before we start diving into what do we actually do, we ask ourselves some questions on each one of these things, right? Big question is why? Why do I want to do that? What's the benefit from some of these things? Is there a standard? Right? If there's no standard to start making massive upgrades to things, why do I want to do some of those things? How does this help, or hurt human drivers or vulnerable road users, right? Bikes and pets. You can't just be looking at the automation piece of this. Then what is the potential this actually becomes a reality, right? We don't know what's going to happen many, many years from now. We were recently approached about, AIM, right? So AIM is automated intersection management where you have no signal systems. Great, right? But probably not going to be a reality for 50 years. So how much time and effort do we put inside of those technology pieces right now? And then how can actually consumers use this technology is a big piece for us too. We can develop a little something here in a vacuum in a test world, but if I can't get out to the general consumer and there's no path to actually get it deployed, what's the point of doing that exercise? So I'll go through kind of our approach to these different pieces. So starting with signs, right? People kept coming to me recently and said, you need to start upgrading your signs, right? We asked the question, why? Well, automated vehicles may need it. But at the same time, 3M is actually developing some more advanced technology, these smart signs with codes inside of them. So is the technology going to be just our standard signs? Is it going to be this 3M type sign? We don't really know. We say, what's the standard? What's wrong with our current signs? What can't the cars actually do with their current signs? And nobody has an answer for us. So we kind of look at that and say, well, signs is something we should keep an eye on, but probably not need to do anything right now. I think we have a pretty good process at MnDOT already today. We have probably the best sheeting materials that most states have on our roadways. Probably not a huge investment for right now in signs, but keeping our eye on this and working with 3M on some of their technology. So 3M is actually testing some of their smart signs up at our mineral facility. We have a truck up there that goes around all day, and they actually have the truck outfitted with the technology and the signs. So we're working with them on some of those pieces, but not probably a huge investment today on signs. Then we start looking at traffic signals, right? So the question is why, right? So the car industry is saying, yep, connectivity is going to be big in the future. We don't really know what it's going to be. We don't know if it's going to be DSRC. We don't know if it's going to be 5G. We don't know if it's going to be getting it right on the signal system or out of a database. But this is probably an area that we should start looking at, right? It has some real potential that can actually do things and move things forward. So can the consumer actually use it, right? Toyota is saying, I'm going to put it in my cars. In 2021, I'm going to have that technology in my cars. Well, great. This is something that we can actually do working with a car manufacturer that can actually be used by consumers. great step forward. So signal systems is something, yep, that's good for us. Right, data. Data is a big piece too. You need to start collecting all this data. So these cars are going to be in the future emitting 10 times a second a basic safety message. That's an enormous amount of data. So Michigan started collecting some of this data recently and just overloaded their whole entire system. So we've been talking with our traffic management people, and they're like, well, you know what? A lot of the data that we need, we can get off of probe data or INRIX data or things that we actually have today. And maybe we don't need to put up roadside units every 500 feet. But there's some data that maybe we want to have. Maybe queue detection might be a good use of data from these vehicles. Or maybe it's getting information about weather incidents. So we're trying to be strategic on what data we actually need to collect off of vehicles versus what data we can get from other sources that might be actually be easier for us to get and maintain. Pavement markings is a big one too. I'll go through some details on what the feds are recommending there too. But we're looking at pavement markings on, well, if they can benefit a human driver at the same time, maybe it's something that we should be taking a look at. Then we have the big question about automated lanes or specific lanes. So in Europe, I think it was Norway recently, said in their HOV lanes, they started allowing electric vehicles to be in those lanes. But now they have so many electric vehicles that it's starting to cause congestion in the lanes. So before we start looking at how do we start converting lanes to automated vehicles or truck platooning, one, that is a big political thing to tackle. We start talking about taking away lanes and dedicating towards other pieces. If we haven't put things in really simplified terms, right? If I have a 3-lane freeway and I'm going to say, I'm going to take 1 lane and dedicate it towards automated vehicles, I probably need to have about 33% market penetration before it's even worthwhile to possibly have that lane. So by the time we get to 33 market penetration, based on our earlier discussions today, when maybe you can start buying it around 2040, 2035, your 33% market penetration is probably 2045, 2050. So things that, yeah, we should kind of keep on our radar, but is this a political thing we even want to tackle today? Probably not, but things to start thinking about. Then there's the big app piece, right? This is where we get approached a lot by people saying, I have a great widget for you, MnDOT. It's an app, right? So we'll put this technology out there. There'll be an app, and somebody can download the app, and it's going to tell you exactly what the curve is going to be ahead, or it's going to be something else. We say, great, but how do I get that out to all the different consumers that can actually use it, right? Well, they just would need to find the app and download the app. So each state and each county is going to develop all their own individual apps. If you're traveling from Minnesota to California, I got to download 50 different apps on different things. So our approach is basically, these are great. We want to be careful though too, because we're sending the message of, put your phone away when you're driving at the same time versus trying to use the phone. But if there's a way that that app is readily available, that you're working with a Google or a Waze or somebody where it's easy to get out and access to, that's great. But a one-off app that you want the DOT to operate and maintain is probably not the best solution for us moving forward. But we're open to those different concepts as long as there's a path where the mass consumers can easily get the information. All right, so those are some of MnDOT's approaches. You may agree with those, you may disagree with those, but that's kind of the path we're taking right now. So what we're trying to do is formulate all this into a plan. So we have some draft recommendations that kind of go over some of the things that we talked about earlier. So we're looking at developing a strategic plan to help us focus in on what is the future. So on the long-range planning side is how do you plan for something that you don't know about that's going to be 20 years out. So our planners are actually doing scenario planning workshops. But they're going out there working with the MPOs saying there's a bunch of different scenarios, right? The future could be nothing, right? It's going to be status quo as is. The future could be everything's automated. The future could be, well, maybe not automation. Maybe everything is connected. Or the future may be, you know what, it's going to be private ownership of automated vehicles, or it could be it's not private ownership of automated vehicles. Why are Uber and Lyft so big in this technology? Why are they really pushing this? It's cost, right? So they're saying if I can take the driver out of the car, I can bring that cost down so much that you're probably better off not owning a car, just Ubering and Lyfting everywhere that you want to go. Because the cost of owning a car is between like $6,000 and $9,000 a year when you add up all the different costs. So that's the model that they're actually going for. So how do all these things play out in terms of what's the impact to us? So that's what our planners are looking at is, here's all these potential futures, and I can't plan for every single one of them. There's too many unknowns. But what are some common themes across those different scenarios that I can actually start thinking about today? So they can say, oh, all right, this thing is probably going to occur because no matter what scenario it is, it's something that we need to be planning for. So that's what our planners are working on right now. We're looking at what are those capital needs, right? Where should we be investing in fiber optic or signal system upgrades or pavement markings? Where should we be doing more strategic workshop? Dedicated lanes are a great example where, yes, it's something that we should be cognizant of, but it's more of a long-term research thing. So where should we be focusing our research effort? Who do we partner with? What's the impact to our regulations and how we do business? How do we operate and maintain these things, right? So you look at a DSRC, we've learned a lot on a project I'll talk about in a minute, but how do you maintain these systems that are out there? And how do you staff for these things? If I have DSRC radio that's out there, how do I have staff that actually has the knowledge to maintain these things? Do I need radio operators, licensed radio operators? Can they even get those people? Big questions that we're trying to answer. Then what's the impact of multimodal? And then how do we actually communicate automated vehicles out? So a couple different things. Mike Fairbanks is here, so if you have technical questions on this, I'm going to put Mike on the spot. But this is, so we talked about signal systems earlier, right? And this is something that we think is going to occur. We think that there's going to be that technology connection piece required between the vehicle and the infrastructure. So about 2 or 3 years ago, AASHTO put out a challenge to all the states and said, all right, we want to show the car industry that as transportation owners, we are interested in this and we're invested in this. So they said, every state, we want you to have 20 connected signal systems. So signal systems that are broadcasting signal phasing and timing through dedicated short-range communications. So we selected our Highway 55 corridor. So this is basically downtown Minneapolis, the edge, all the way out to 494. There's 22 signal systems along that corridor. So we're hoping to be the first state that actually has secure signal phasing and timing. A lot of states are doing this already, but it's not secure. So the car manufacturers are saying, I need to know it's a real signal system and not some kid out there with a smartphone app saying, I'm a signal system, you need to stop where you need to go. So that's one of our goals, is to be secure. So as that vehicle is communicating to the signal system, that car can actually say, yep, I'm receiving information, but it's actually from a real signal system, not something that's made up. And to be the test vehicles along that roadway, we're going to outfit our snowplows with snowplow priority. So as those plows are plowing late at night, and they don't have to stop at all those stoplights, they can call ahead and say, I'm a snowplow, can you turn green for me? And that signal system will recognize them as, yep, that's a real MnDOT snowplow, not a fake snowplow that somebody's broadcasting out there. I'm going to go through my priority progressions and then possibly give them priority to go through the signal system. So that system should be up and running next year in the snowplow priority. But we're also looking at how do we get data out to third parties. So if you own like an Audi or an Audi right now, what Audi does is they have a third-party vendor, and they go to cities, DOTs, and they say, I want your signal data, but I don't want to get it through the DSRC radio. I want to get it out of your central server. And they go and they write algorithms. If you have a certain Audi vehicle, there's a countdown timer right inside your dashboard that they can actually do red light countdowns. So that's what they want to get out of this. So it's how do we get our signal data out to third parties, and then how do we receive and process all this data? It's just tons and tons of data, and what do we do with it? How do we store it? And what do we actually learn? So this is a little demo. We have time. So this is signal phasing and timing that we have 4 signal systems up and running right now. But as you're in the vehicle, it's going to show you here, I'm in a through lane, and up here it's telling you, here's what the actual countdown is to green when the signal's going to turn to yellow and red. So right now it's saying, yep, we're in a through lane. Now I'm in a turn lane that's actually red. So it recognizes that you're actually in a turn lane. There's a map that goes along with it too. So this is all being received by an onboard unit inside that vehicle. So now we're at the stoplight and it's telling you when exactly that's going to turn to green. Sorry, it's a little shaky. I was in the back seat of a minivan. Testing this out. But we're planning on, once we get the corridor fully up and running, we have 4 signal systems right now. Once we get all 22, we'll be having a lot more demonstrations for people to come out and see the technology. So it's actually up and running. It's working, which is a good sign. So we're sitting there at the signal system, and it says green to go, and it perfectly matches up with the timing that's out there. So just an example of what the technology can actually do. How are we doing on time? Okay. Yep. So we've learned, I think Mike would agree, we've learned an immense amount of how complex this actually is to set up and to maintain, and how do you know that it's actually broadcasting spat? How do you know it's doing it accurately? And is the map message, we learned today that one of our map messages is corrupt or messed up. So how do you even recognize these things, and how do you fix it? So huge challenges for us as we start to learn about maintaining the system. So how many have heard of the Minnesota Cab Challenge? If you're a consultant out there, you should know about it, right? All right. So the Minnesota Cab Challenge is a brand new procurement process we've done. So we basically said, we get approached by the industry a lot, right? I have this thing that can solve your problem, or I have this thing that can solve your problem. And there's no good way for us to bring them under contract. So we work with our Department of Administration, we're the first state agency to do this, but we have an open-ended RFP. So the RFP says, hey, private industry, if you have an idea that can help us solve a transportation challenge, we listed several of them inside the RFP. So it's operating a vehicle with AV technology in snow and ice conditions. It's improved work zone operations. It's worker safety. It's building public trust. It's just safety and operations of other roadways. So a list of different things in there. So if you have an idea, come to us. So what the industry does is they say, yep, MnDOT, I have an idea. But we said, before you submit a proposal, don't waste a lot of time and money writing up a proposal that you're going to send to us. We're going to say, this is not what we want. So the industry can call us up and say, I have an idea. They come in, they meet with us one-on-one, so you can kind of bounce your idea off us and say, here's what I'm thinking about, MnDOT. What do you think? And we can give you some feedback along the way. We can say, all right, that's great, but have you thought about this or this or this or this? And we don't share your information with anybody else. It's all confidential. So if you give us a handout at the end, we turn it right back over to you and say, great, but I'm not keeping on this, because if I get a data practices request, then it's public information. So that vendor then has the opportunity to go back and they say, okay, based on what I heard from MnDOT today, I don't think they like this idea. Let's scrap it. Or they may say, oh, I think MnDOT had a decent interest in that. Let's write it up and submit it. So it's an open-ended RFP, so it doesn't have a defined close date. But every 2 months, we say, okay, if you submit your proposal on this date, we're going to evaluate it this month. Or if you miss that date, submit one in February. If you miss the February date, submit one in April. So every 2 months, we evaluate these proposals that come in. And you're not really scored against each other. You're kind of just scored on your own criteria. So in the first round, we're about to announce those contracts very soon, as they're signed. We had 5 proposals, and we accepted 3. This last round, we just evaluated it last week. We got a handful of proposals again. I can't disclose what we've selected or not selected. So some real things are kind of moving forward in that space. And it's a great chance for us to talk to people that we normally don't have a chance to contract with. Excuse me. Car manufacturers and different technology providers. So if you have a great idea, bring it to us, and we can evaluate that for funding. Also, when we talk about our 55 corridors, more of our urban corridor, we're looking at developing Highway 52 between Rochester and Minneapolis, building out some fiber optic on there, adding some roadside units to start getting out some queue warning and maybe some weather information. That project is not funded yet, but it's being designed right now. We're looking at an automated truck-mounted attenuator. So this is a project that we're working on, a pool fund with Colorado right now. It's a work zone safety piece. So this truck is basically in the work zone. Our truck-mounted attenuators get hit all the time. So it's big for us. It's a big worker safety piece. Our employees are exposed out there. So this truck is in that convoy, that work zone convoy. It's leaving electronic breadcrumbs to this vehicle behind. So this vehicle behind, actually, in the future, could have no driver. It's actually just moving along with the work zone. So the vehicles are still out there providing that protection for our workers in the work zone, but the driver is actually not inside that vehicle being exposed to risk. Also looking at rural intersection connectivity. We talked about data. Data is a big piece of signal data. Well, that's great in the metro area where everything is connected, but what about greater Minnesota? We're trying to figure out how can we get that signal timing information back inside of our central database through cellular connections. Then looking at some enhanced pavement markings on the I-94 jobs that are occurring next year in our St. Cloud district. I'll go through some more details on that. So pavement markings. These are some of the early recommendations that are coming out. There's the MUTCD has a CAV subcommittee, and these are some of the earlier recommendations. So comparing our MnDOT recommendations excuse me, to the MUTCD recommended minimum. So right now, we do a 4-inch line. They're recommending minimum of 6. Skip spacing, we do a 1040, which is probably the biggest skip spacing that I think is kind of around the country. They're recommending a 15-25. So we'd probably keep our 50-foot interval, but going to more of a 20-foot skip and a 30-foot gap would be maybe our future option. Dotted extensions through the ramps. So we don't really, right now it's optional for us. But if you've ever driven on a Tesla or a vehicle that's using the lane lines, when they come to a ramp, right, they're looking at the center, they're looking at the skip line, they're looking at the edge line. Then you come to the ramp, and the ramp kind of takes off like this. The car kind of wiggles, and it doesn't know to go down the ramp or if it should go back on the freeway. So we're recommending that for machine vision, that you do that skip line through the exit ramps. Gore marking width, we do an 8-inch. They recommend a 10-inch. They also recommend the chevron styles inside the gores, which we don't do either. And then minimum reflectivity, we're fine. They're looking at as low as 35 millicandelas, and we're actually at 80 to 100. So we're not too concerned about this piece. But these are all some big changes for us. These are big, high-cost pieces. We're looking at our skips, basically doubling the amount of materials and workmanship we have to go down. They also recommend contrast markings, 1 inch on each side. So for us, that's going from a bigger, a much wider groove at the same time to recess all of our markings. So we're looking at doing just kind of a pilot on the I-94 job. But just to make these changes on that project is about $500,000 on one project. So big changes. I think that's it. So I covered a lot of material and may disagrees with some of the things, and I'd be happy to hear what your thoughts are. Any questions?
I'll start out the questions, but what are some of the big kind of pitfalls for autonomous vehicles or automated vehicles interacting with driver vehicles? And has there been any legislation passed to kind of withhold technology so that they can interact with driver vehicles easier?
I have not seen anything passed along that lines. I know NHTSA is being really cautious on some of those low-speed shuttles and how they'll allow them to interact with mixed traffic. Unfortunately, you only hear bad news. So Las Vegas had a demonstration about a year or so ago with AAA, one of those low-speed shuttles, and day one there was a crash, right? And the big news was autonomous vehicle involved in a crash. What was the source of the crash? A human driver in a truck backing up, back into the vehicle. The vehicle stopped. The automated vehicle stopped. The human driver backed into it. What did they do? They blamed the automated vehicle. So that's how the press did it. So I think one of the big challenges are there's going to be some setbacks along the way. You're going to have some of those incidents. Even the Uber incident in Arizona where the pedestrian was killed, those are tragic, right? But you hear about those one crashes, those fatalities, but you don't hear about the other 300 people that were killed in the United States that day because of a human piece. So we really need to get back to, yes, there's going to be some hiccups along the way. We can't let that set us back. We still continue to move forward. But making sure that we're always bringing it back to, yes, but there's still a lot of other crashes occurring, 34,000 a year, 39,000 a year with human drivers. So that's probably the biggest piece is that public perception. Everybody freaks out when they see a crash between another vehicle or a human. But it's drowning it. These are lessons learned to get where we want to be, but it has a huge potential for success. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, truck platooning, we're going to have to redesign all the entrances and exits to allow that. And California's already experiencing that on some of the bigger freeways where they restrict trucks to the 2 right lanes. To the point where they've actually built truck bypasses at major intersections. So the trucks are taking off, so the cars can actually use the exits.
Yeah, so the question is on redesigning our entrance and exit ramps for truck platooning. That's why we're taking more of a permitting approach. We're not just saying they're allowed. Some states are just saying, yep, truck platooning is allowed. But we don't really know the infrastructure impacts yet. We don't know the operational impacts yet. So we're going to do more of a plan process and a permit process. So we're getting a lot of push by the industry to say, well, why, Minda, you're the only state that's requiring a permit. You're the only state that's doing this. You're the only state that's doing that. And we're like, we're not ready. We're not ready to just say, yep, you're ready to go along our freeways. We don't know enough yet. There's only been a few demonstrations around the country, and usually they're happening out in the middle of the desert. So great point. We don't know, and that's why we're being a little more cautious. We know the technology can account for the cut-ins, where a vehicle will cut in between. They'll disengage or separate with the technology piece. But that's one particular vendor that we know about, right? There could be 4 or 5 startups out there that we don't know what their technology is. So that's why we're trying to be a little more cautious. You know, the one vendor that we're working with is very good. And he's like, well, our technology works just fine. Why can't you write it this way? We're like, yes, we understand how your technology works, but we don't know what all the other mom and pops are developing this in the garage at the same time. And that's the big risk for us.
So yeah, to Danny's comment, our signing systems are designed on the right side of the road. For platoon trucks, there's almost no way you're going to see those signs on the right side. Almost have to double them or put them up on top.
Yep, good point. Those one of those operational pieces that we want to learn more about, see what the impacts are. So most platoons are two trucks. Our legislation would allow up to 3. I think in Japan they're doing 7 trucks in a platoon. That's a train going down the roadway. And how do you safely merge in and out? And how do you see the signs on the right side? So that's why we're taking kind of this cautious approach. So I think it's good for us to learn and see how these things actually do. So we have that permit, we can actually do some observations and some studying at the same time.
The video clip that you showed of the signal counter in the car.
Yep.
Can you clarify what the safety benefit of that was, or what issue that was solving?
Yep. So eventually it will be a red light warning to the drivers inside the car. So if the car is going down, the car can kind of say, all right, you're approaching this intersection, it's going to be red, and you're still going 30 miles an hour. They would give some kind of audible warning. If it's a connected vehicle application, we give that audible warning back, and the car driver then needed to react. If it's automated vehicle technology, then the vehicle can actually slow down by itself. So it's giving that information back to an automated vehicle. So we're hoping it's going to help with red light running. And then from the environmental side, it's more of an eco-driving piece. So I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in Green Bay, and it's so interesting to see how they drive over there. It's like the light turns green, you hammer it, and you go to the next light, which is red, and you slam on your brakes. I'm like, if I knew that signal was going to be red, right, I don't need to hammer on it. I can just eco-drive up each signal system. That's what Europe is kind of looking at. So we're hoping it's going to be red light running at the intersections. But a connected vehicle, it's only going to provide a warning. An automated vehicle, it would actually stop the vehicle. Okay, we have time for one more question. All right. Oh, yeah.
Has there been much indication as far as level, once they get to level 5, being able to actually operate in snow conditions like we've had? Has there been much on that end?
So the question is operating in snowy conditions with level 5. We've not seen a lot in this area. We think there's some testing occurring in Michigan near the car manufacturers. We look at where all the testing is right now, right? It's happening in Arizona, Nevada, Florida, Texas, and California, right? We didn't really have those conditions. Our conversations are with the industry is we got to figure out the basics first before we even start tackling that snow and ice piece. That's why you'll see people that will say, I have a level 5 vehicle. If it can operate in yesterday's weather, then I'll believe you, right? But until then, I don't think you have a level 5 vehicle. So I think snow and ice, they said snow and ice is going to be a big challenge. We did learn a couple different things. So we had our little shuttle that we had at Mineral last year, and we had snow up there. So everybody was saying, well, if the pavement markings are covered, right, you don't rely on your cameras, you rely on your LiDAR technology instead, which was, the LiDAR worked great, the GPS worked great. When it was a snow-covered roadway or slush-covered roadway, it knew exactly where it was, and it would detect slippage and everything else and get back on track. But as soon as it started to snow, the LiDAR would pick up the snow and say, there's something in front of me. I don't know if it's a dog or a human or what it is. And the technology would come to a drastic stop. So it's the blowing snow and the heavy snows that are going to be the challenge. What's actually falling, the snow-covered roadway, is not going to be that much of a challenge besides just kind of calculating the braking distance and everything else. So thank you very much for having me today.
Jay. And as part of NCITE, we'd like to thank you for speaking today with our speaker gift this year, one of the pad folios. And then,
I got one.
Mike is very jealous of JNS. But one note to add, for the PDHs, we'll be sending those out in an email after. We're trying to conserve some paper, and a lot of people end up scanning them in anyways. So if you would like a paper copy in the future, let us know, let one of the directors know, and we'll print out some of those in the future. But we're trying kind of the digital email for a meeting or two here. So, With that, thanks everyone for coming. Jeff, did you have any additional announcements?
Nope, thanks everybody for coming.
All right, thanks a lot.